Ah, 1 more minute to go. How long will you be staying with us, Janice?
Through the session.
Oh, great. Great. That's a big moral support.
Uncle,
Okay, time. Jai Meher Baba. Avatar Meher Baba ki.
Baba ki jai.
Janice, could you do the prayer, please?
Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Beloved God, help us all to love you more and more, and more and more, and still yet more, till we become worthy of union with you. And help us all to hold fast to Baba's Daman till the very end. Avatar Meher Baba
Baba
ki
ki
jai.
jai.
Avatar Meher Baba
Meher
ki
Baba
jai.
ki jai.
Avatar Meher Baba
Meher Baba ki jai.
Jai Baba, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday meeting. At the onset, I'd like to, it's a bit of a sad news. Our long-time member and a trustee of our Bombay Center, Mr. Airaj Karadia, went to Baba this morning. In fact, his funeral must be going on right now as we speak. I don't know whether it's a sad thing or, well, he got relieved of his sufferings. The man had asked to finish off every account of his during this birth because he wanted mukti. And I think he was granted that. He suffered very badly. For 5 years, he was bedridden, never spoke, never, just kept staring and stuff like that. So may Baba keep his nazar on his soul. Today, when we observe silence after the prayers, I'd like all of us to remember him and pray to Baba to keep his nazar on his soul. Also, all our eyes are now set on forthcoming birthday celebration. And everybody is overjoyed. The center is being spruced up with decorations, etc. For those of us who do not know, we've been lucky enough to buy or purchase the connecting adjacent room so that we can expand the center at a great cost and an expense. And we shall now be coming out with an appeal for donations. So keep digging in your pockets and contribute whatever you can in Baba's cause. Today we have with us Bif Sopher. He's a man of few words. He is from US, from the San Francisco Bay Area. Most of the gardens that we see around Meherabad, he has contributed a lot towards it. He's also a great photographer. And more than anything else, what I like about him is he takes us around to places of interest. Like the last time that we were in Meherabad, he took us around on a trip to Happy Valley. And the way he described everything in detail, connection with Ram, etc., etc., I will never forget. Like I said, he's soft-spoken, so please listen to him very carefully. And if you have any questions, raise your hands and feel free to ask. And let's have a very enjoyable evening in Baba's love. Thank you. And Bif, all yours, sir. Jai
Sam
Baba.
Uncle,
Haan
sorry
ji.
to interrupt. Invite Baba to the
Oh,
program.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you.
Thank you, Baba.
This is what I usually do, and I forgot today. We usually always invite Meher Baba to come and join us for the meeting. Not only just join us, but to take over the entire proceedings so that everything that happens, the speakers speaking, etc., etc., all that happens will be at his wish. Thank you, Baba. All yours, Beef.
Okay, Sam said I should try to talk loudly, so I hope I don't sound doing that. I'll tell my Baba story to start with. So I was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1948. And at the age of 2, I moved with my family to the San Francisco Bay Area in the mid-peninsula, which is close to Palo Alto and Stanford University. And in 1956, Mayor Baba came to San Francisco. And at that time, I was 8 years old. And he came down for a day to Ivy Juice's house, which was in a place called Woodside. And I was growing up in a community adjacent to Woodside. And then he also went to Don Stevens' house on that same day, which is in Menlo Park. And where Don was living was only a couple of miles from where I was a boy of 8 years old, not knowing anything about Meher Baba. But later, later, I noticed that there was a group of us that lived, if you drew a circle between Ivy Deuce's house and Don Stevens' house, inside that circle, there were 8 of us that were attracted to each other and became friends. And we went to 5 different schools. We ranged in age from 12 to 19. And somehow, each in our own way, we all became Baba lovers. So I have this sense that when Baba came to my neighborhood, that he was planting seeds that later sprouted. And one of the friends, when Baba came, was only 5 years old, and he was only a mile from Ivy Deuce's house where Baba stayed. And his name is Jay Bonner, and he ended up marrying Baba's niece, Shireen, the daughter of Adi Jr. And another friend, Beverly Smith, I don't know if you know of her, but she writes beautiful Baba music, beautiful songs, and she's a professional musician. And in my family history, I always say that I was raised agnostic. And so our household was not religious. But our parents, I had two younger sisters, and my parents decided that we should go to Presbyterian Sunday school and we could decide for ourselves about religion. So we went to these Sunday school classes that mainly I felt was very boring. But once in a while, they would tell stories of Christ and his disciples. And I was always interested in those stories. And then after about 3 years of that, my parents said, well, do you want to continue going to Sunday school? And my response was, well, all those Sundays I could have been outdoors playing. So my religious experience stopped at that time for myself and my sisters. And when I was a teenager, was in the 1960s in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it was a very exciting time. There was a lot going on. There was the civil rights movement. There was the war in Vietnam. And in the mix of all of that, there was some people that were promoting psychedelic drugs that these Harvard professors, Richard Leary and Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary were promoting the use of LSD. And so people didn't know much about it. And in a naive way, they tried some of these drugs. But there was this atmosphere in the society that was, you could almost feel that people felt like anything's possible, that we can change society for the better, we can make a more just society, and we can do all kind of creative things. And I always attribute that atmosphere in the 60s to the universal work that Baba was doing in seclusion. And we were feeling just a little bit of the after effects of that intensive spiritual work that Baba was doing in the late 60s. So then when I was 19, some friends of mine and I rented a cabin in the Redwood Forest in the Santa Cruz Mountains, close to where Baba had visited in Woodside. And all those other friends that I mentioned, they would congregate and show up at our little cabin in the woods. And it became like a clubhouse. And kids that were still in school, they would play hooky from school, or they would come and spend the weekends with us. And there was a very free and happy atmosphere. And all of us were not interested in religion, but we were intrigued by the idea of consciousness. And so we had this eclectic collection of books of all kinds that dealt with consciousness, such as The Way of Zen by Alan Watts, and Autobiography of a Yogi, and The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and Black Elk Speaks, who was a Native American wise man. And so we would read and discuss, and we're very interested in the idea of expanding our consciousness, you could say. And at the same time, my friend, who was one of the ones renting the cabin, he had an artistic side. So he put an Indian bed sheet on the ceiling, and we would burn incense, and we'd listen to Ravi Shankar and other Indian music on the stereo system, mixed in with all of the new music that was happening in the San Francisco Bay Area that was more based in like rock and roll. And as I say, that we were very naive. We had no real concept of what Baba talks about in terms of spirituality. Words like samadhi, darshan, prasad, things like that, we'd never heard of. And so we were just kind of winging it and just experimenting and trying different things. So in my group of friends in high school, they had all decided that they wanted to experiment with this LSD. And I was the last in the group to try it. And when I took the LSD, it was pure LSD, and it was very, very strong. And you could say I had a bad trip, that I would hallucinate whole things that weren't actually happening. And so, but in my naivete, I thought, well, everyone says that this is a positive thing to do, that this will help expand your consciousness. And so there must be something wrong with me, and I should do it again to get over the problem that I'm having when I take the LSD. And it took me quite a while of trying it and failing. And finally, I realized that if I kept taking these psychedelic drugs, that it wasn't going to improve things, but it was going to make things worse. And that basically I was just poisoning myself. And but that took a while for me to recognize and experience. And so I told you that we had this eclectic collection of books in the house. And at Stanford University, that was also influenced by this atmosphere of freedom and creativity. Some of the professors and the students were wanting to offer classes that the university would not approve. So what they did is they formed a free university, and anybody could teach a class if they could find people that were interested in taking it. So my friend Kevin and his sister Sarah, Kevin was 15 and Sarah was 16. They were taking a class offered at the Free University, an offshoot of Stanford University. And the class was on Meherabad. And the text for the course was the discourses. So naturally, the next time they came to our cabin in the redwood forest, Kevin brought the discourses and showed them to me. And it was the first time, this is in 1967. And it was the first time that I had seen a photograph of Meher Baba. And I read just the one-page description of who he is. And in it, what struck me was that he said, "I am God in human form." And my reaction to that was, well, this man that lives in India, halfway around the world, says that he's God in human form, but I don't even know if God exists, because I was still an agnostic. And that was it. I didn't bother to read any of the discourses at that time. But I did go to a lecture. One of these Harvard professors, Richard Alpert, And later, Alpert had gone to India and taken a new name, and he became known as Ram Das. But at that time, he was still a Harvard professor, and his name was Richard Alpert. And at the end of his lecture about the benefits of taking psychedelic drugs, someone raised their hand and said, well, we hear that you had correspondence with Meherabad. And Albert turned red in the face and he wouldn't answer the question. And I heard later that actually Albert had been encouraged to write to Baba by some Baba lovers. And in his letter to Meher Baba, he described the great spiritual experiences he was having on LSD. And Baba wrote back to him and tried to explain to him that, you know, what you're experiencing isn't helping you spiritually because it doesn't last. That you take your drug and then eventually the effects wear off and then you have to take the drug again. And a real spiritual experience is everlasting. It always remains with you. So they had this correspondence back and forth. And finally, Baba told Richard, he said, okay, you can take LSD 3 more times. And unfortunately, Alpert didn't take Baba's advice and he ended up taking it many more times. But I heard later that he said he had wished that he had taken Baba's advice because if he had, his drug karma would have been finished. But unfortunately, he didn't take Baba's advice. And then at that time in San Francisco, I don't know if you know about the hippies movement and flower power and all of that, but it was all part of this kind of euphoric atmosphere that existed at that time. And so I was, and one of the main places, kind of a center for it, was called Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. So I was in the Haight-Ashbury and I went into a shop where they sell all the paraphernalia that you use for using drugs, like hookah pipes and rolling papers and things like that. I was walking past the store, there was a photograph of a man. And I intuitively thought, well, he looks very wise. So I turned and went back to the photograph, and it was Meher Baba. And under his photograph, there was a warning. It said, Meher Baba says, don't use drugs. And I was still in this naive state. And I thought, well, you know, everyone I know that wants to make the world a better place, a more just place, that wants to end the war in Vietnam, that wants to have justice for all, at least smokes pot. And the people that don't are the bankers, the politicians, the generals who like their whiskey. And so my thought when I read what Baba said, don't take drugs, I said, well, he looks wise, but why does he say that? So I was still in this very naive state at that time. And then a few months later, I was back in our cabin in the Redwood Forest. And there was just a few of us that evening. And a friend came who was half Russian and her father was from Arkansas, named Candy Hill. And she had also just been up in the Haight-Ashbury. And she was all excited and she said, oh, when I was up there with my friend, we met a witch. And the witch told us how to make witch's brew. So those of us that were there in the cabin, we said, oh, really? Well, how do you make it? And she said, well, do you have any wine? So we had a bottle of this very cheap Red Mountain wine, and we brought it out, put it on the table. And she said, do you have any LSD? And we said, yes. Well, then you put the LSD in the wine. Do you have any psilocybin? And that's a derivative of magic mushrooms. And we had that, so we put that in the wine. Do you have any mescaline, which is a derivative from peyote? And we put that in the wine. And then we were so enthusiastic that we took the water from the hookah pipe that we had been using to smoke hashish, and we dumped all that water into the wine also, and we drank it. And amazingly, as I said previously, I'd had these bad trips, and they were frightening because I didn't feel like I was in control, and things were happening that were quite negative. But in this particular concoction that we drank, it just made us silly. And we just stayed up all night and we're laughing. And I remember one of my friends was up in the rafters of the cabin and he had a blanket over his shoulder and he's flapping his wings and saying, I'm a kooky looky bird. And it just made us laugh. And in that cabin, there was one single room. And I was in that room by myself about 2 or 3 in the morning. And all of a sudden the thought came, "It says don't use drugs." And my response was, well, if he knew what a good time we were having, he'd say it's okay. And then the next thought was, Meher Baba says that he's God in human form. And my reaction to that was, well, I wonder what it's like to be God. I know what it's like to be me, but I wonder what the experience of God is. And years later, it dawned on me that was the moment where I started believing in God. How it happened, I don't know. But I wouldn't have asked the question if I didn't believe in God. And so in that moment at 2 or 3 in the morning, I had perfect concentration. And my whole focus was just on that one thought. Well, what's it like to be God? And finally what came to me was, well, if God is God and he created all of this, that means everything came from him. So that there's absolutely nothing that exists in this world that didn't come from him. No matter how beautiful or how ugly, that it all came from him. Which also meant that he's everywhere and he's in everything. And then I thought, this is in 1968. So Baba was still living in either at Meherabad or Guru Prasad. And I thought, well, this man in India says he's that. He says, I am God in human form. So my response to that was, well, if he's really that, that means that he's here with me in this room halfway across the world in a redwood forest. And at that moment, I felt his presence all around me. And I remember Baidu Sarwar, and she said, oh, you had Baba's darshan. And at the time, I didn't even know what darshan meant. But I did feel his presence. And when I finally came and went inside Meher Baba's tomb, I felt that same presence that I felt in that redwood forest in 1968. And then after that, some of my friends and I decided we would travel around Northern California and Oregon. And there were all these attempts at communes, creating communes where people would open up land and anybody could come and live there and build a house. And people tried to live in harmony and all that. So I was interested in that. And so we hitchhiked all over and went and spent a few days at these different communes. And at night, we would camp with a fire. And this time I had brought the discourses and I started reading them. And I have to compare it with the little that I read in the Bible. And I have kind of a scientific, logical mind. And so my logical mind says, well, these stories I'm reading in the Bible, they happened 2,000 years ago. And when I tell a story and someone repeats the story I told, and then that person that hears the story repeats it again, each time the story changes. So I know for sure that the stories that I'm reading in the Bible that happened 2,000 years ago are not exactly how it happened. And I would just read some stories and think, okay, that sounds right. And then other things would just rub me the wrong way. And I'd say, no, I can't accept this. And I was so critical that I could even say, well, who could even prove that Christ even existed? Because it's 2,000 years since he lived. But when I was reading Baba's discourses, I couldn't say that because he was still living. So for me to come to him when he was still living was important. And when I read the discourses, they just made so much sense that my critical mind didn't even work. And I just said, oh, yes, this makes sense. And especially when Baba talked about reincarnation, that I just couldn't accept the Christian idea that you have one lifetime and you either get it right and you go to heaven, or you get it wrong, you go to hell. And I thought, this whole creation is so beyond imagination in terms of all the universes and all the time that creation has existed. And how can a soul just have one lifetime to do everything? So it was a great relief to hear that, no, you have many lifetimes and you have all kinds of experiences, from being a king to a beggar, etc., etc. And so that let me relax a little bit also. And then when we were on this tour of communes all over Northern California, Oregon, on Monday nights, we'd always hike back to Berkeley, and there were Baba meetings. And so we would attend these Baba meetings. And in one of the meetings, they showed a film of Baba. And in the film, Baba was old, and it was a darshan program. And there was hundreds of people coming before him. And at the time I was 20, and I thought, he's an old man, but he's so alert, he's so lively. So, and I am 20, but I couldn't do what he's doing. And I was intently watching how people reacted after they had had his darshan. And some people were smiling. Some people had tears in their eyes. Some people were within themselves, deep in themselves. And somehow I recognized that he is helping each individual. He's personally helping each individual. And if he can do that, then he must be who he says he is. So that was the moment where I accepted him and recognized him as who he says he is, that I am God in human form. And from that moment on, my whole goal in life is just to get closer and closer to him. So that's kind of a a version of how I became a Baba lover in 1968, which is what, 55 years ago, I guess. Okay, Sam, do you want to say something?
Not really. Beef, carry on, sir.
Okay, so let me see how much time I have. Okay, so I like to tell a story of how I got to become a resident of Meherabad. Can I tell that story?
Yeah, please go ahead. Anybody has
Okay.
any questions before we go any further? Does anyone want to ask anything? Please ask now or hold your peace forever.
Forever is a long time. So, all right, I'll go ahead. So, um, so I became Mayor Baba's lover in 1968, and he was inviting us to come for his darshan in Pune, and I wanted to come, but I didn't have the ultimately I didn't have the money to afford to come in the darshan program that happened in 1969. And then sometime after that, I formed a strong connection with the Baba place called Meherabad, which is in Southern California, where Baba had gone also in 1956. And I ended up living there for 2.5 years with Agnes Barron, who was holding on to the property for Baba. And finally, in 1977, I had enough money so I could come to India for the first time. And I had a job also. And in the US, vacations are very stingy. So I only had a 2-week vacation. So I was able to come to Meherabad for 10 days in 1977. But it was, for me, it was the most blissful 10 days of my life because I got to meet Mera and Mani and Erich, Pendu and Padri and Mansari and Naja and all the special disciples, Mandali of Meher Baba. And I was basically in a state of bliss the whole time. And even though I was only here for 10 days, I knew that this is where I wanted to be. I wanted to end up at Meherabad. But it took me 15 years of longing to actually be able to come and live at Meherabad. And at that time, Mani was the chairman. And she was very clear that we as foreigners that were coming to Meherabad to live, that we had to be self-sustaining. We had to take care of all of our own needs. Because the trust didn't have money, and also legally, I don't think they could pay foreigners. And so we would come as volunteers, but we had to be take care of all of our costs. And I didn't have the money to do that. And I'd heard stories where she had told certain people that wanted to live at Meherabad, oh, you need this amount of money before you can come. And I didn't have anything close to it. But I would come whenever I could. And so towards the end, towards the early 90s, I would come for like 5 months. I would come for 6 months, and then I'd go back. And I was here in 1992. And even though I didn't have the money saved up, somehow I felt like the door was open. And that if I wanted to, I could walk inside. And I didn't want to miss the opportunity of spending time with Baba's Mandali, and experiencing the freshness of the atmosphere of Meherabad. So, and I would, when I was here, for long stays, I would always go to Meherabad and work in Maris Garden as one of the things I would do. So I remember being there at Meherabad, and Mani was walking past Mandali Hall, ready to get into the car to commute to the office in Ahmednagar. And I stopped her and I said, Mani, I'd like to become a permanent resident. And her response was, as long as I'm alive, I'll never say no. And then we sat down at a table there and we had a little conversation. And one of the things she asked was, well, how long will you stay? Because some people would come for 2 or 3 years and then go back, make money, and then come again. And so I looked Mani straight in the eyes and I said, Mani, I hear that the pay is very good. So as long as the pay is good, then I'll stay. And apparently it's good because I'm still here 31 years later. And so when she accepted my request to be a permanent resident, it meant that she had to write a letter of sponsorship so that I could get a special visa to be able to live as a resident. And so she wrote the letter, and I remember in it, it says, we've known this person for a long time. He's a good person. He's a God-loving person. He's not coming here to do any business. He's not coming here to promote any religion. He's solely coming for spiritual training. And then I had to take that letter of sponsorship back to the Indian consulate in California to get a visa. But I was staying on at Meherabad into the summer a little bit. And so that evening I went to see my friends, John and Franny Foreman, who had built a house not far from the Samadhi. And Franny was a doctor. She's the granddaughter of Baidul, the great must hunter. And she married John Foreman, who's a nurse from the States. And so for many years, they looked after the Meher Free Dispensary in Ernagan. And while they were there, they had a little daughter named Rabia. And so that evening, I went to their house. And at the time, Rabia was about 3 years old. And so I was telling them the good news, that Mani said I could become a resident. And then my mind, would start working. And I'm thinking, well, when I go back to the States, where will I live? Will I find a job that I can save money? Except, little nagging, worrying thoughts like that were in my head. And then after a time, it was getting a little bit late. So I said, well, now it's time for me to go back to Lower Meherabad. And little Rabia was still awake. And she says, Daddy, I want to give Bif some money. So on their refrigerator, they had a little cup of coins. And so John brings down the cup and she pulls out a dinar and puts it in my hand and says, Jai Baba. And then she says, but I want to give him more money. So she finds a second dinar and puts it in my hand and says, Jai Baba. And the next day I saw her at the Samadhi and she had a gold dinar that she gave me. And it just felt like a blessing from the children, from her. Previously I'd been a Montessori teacher and I love little children. And so then from Meherabad, eventually I flew back to the East Coast, but I'm from California, the West Coast. So I thought, well, I'll cross the country visiting family and friends. And if anybody offers me a good job, I'll take it. And so, but I ended up crossing the whole country in Oregon. And there was an uncle and a nephew I had met at Meherabad who were kind of entrepreneurs, and they were promoting a pyramid scheme. And I thought, oh, that sounds great. You know, I'll be on top of the pyramid and I can live at Meherabad and people send me money. And so I went to the nephew's house for a couple of weeks to check it out. And I decided it wasn't for me. But while I was there, I went across to the shopping center and there was a little restaurant. And I was inside the restaurant having a bowl of soup. And this little Japanese woman opens the door of the restaurant and looks at me and says, "Bif, is that you?" And it was my ex-wife's sister, and she had her two little girls with her. And I had no idea they were living there. And so I came out on the sidewalk and we were excited to meet like that. And later I got to spend time with them. And I think the littlest girl was 4. And while we're chatting, she finds an old penny on the sidewalk and 2 little flowers that she picked, and she put them in my hand. And again, it felt like this blessing from Meher Baba. So then I traveled back to Davis, California, where I had graduated from the university, and I'd worked in the university sustainable agriculture program, and I had an organic market garden in this homeowners association. And so I had been there quite a number of years. And one of my friend that I used to share a solar design apartment with had moved into a co-op house that was part of this homeowners association. And there were 4 women and 4 men all sharing a house that was built to be a co-op, and it had a big garden and a big kitchen, and everyone took turns cooking meals and making decisions together, and all that was quite nice. So my friend Dawit Zaleka, he was from Ethiopia, and he had become a Baba lover, knowing me, and had come to Meherabad. And he said, "Oh, you know, you can stay in my room while you're waiting to get your visa." And so in that community, I was able to find work in landscaping, gardening, and things like that. And in Davis, a friend of mine had started the first farmers market back in the early 70s. And the idea of these farmers markets kind of spread all over the country. And in Davis, this college town, in the summertime, they blocked off like 4 blocks, and it became like a fair. And there were musicians and magicians and homemade tamales and organic produce and flowers. And it was a nice festive atmosphere. And so I went one summer evening and I ran into this woman that I used to sell my organic produce to. And I said, "Oh, you want to have a picnic?" Because in front of the houses, they had big lawns and we could sit there and enjoy the atmosphere. And she said, "Well, it's a hot summer's evening and I'd like a beer." So we walked down the street to the AM, PM mini market, which means it stay open 24 hours. And she gets her beer, and we're standing in line, and there's about 8 people in front of us. And there's a man paying for his groceries with a little boy who's about 4. And the man drops all these coins on the floor. And the little boy finds a penny on the floor. And he comes back to the end of the line and he puts it in my hand. And everyone is watching, so they start laughing. So the boy is encouraged, so he goes and finds a second penny. He picks it up and comes back to me and puts it in my hand, and people laugh more. So then he found a third penny, and he picks it up, and he comes back to me and puts it in my hand. And they just felt like they belonged to me, so I put them in my pocket. And when I was walking out of the store, I just thought, I must be so dense that Meher Baba has to show me in this gross world that he's right here with me. And he's taking care of all my accounts, including my spiritual accounts. But he's also taking care of my financial accounts. And there's absolutely nothing to worry about. That he's looking after all of it. And it even dawned on me a couple of years after that across from this little grocery store, there's a university state employees credit union, which I had joined when I was a university employee.
Bif,
And yes,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you switch on some lights? Because it's gone
okay.
and you're not visible. Sorry.
Is that a little better?
Yeah, slightly better. But still, your
Slightly.
it's dark. If you can have some more.
These are the only lights that are in the room.
That's okay then. Leave it.
So
Sorry for the interruption. Go ahead.
let me try one thing.
Okay. This is better.
There, I just turned on a flashlight.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I was saying that it dawned on me a couple of years later that directly across from where the little boy pennies was this credit union that I had joined when I was an employee at the university. And today it's still my bank. That so I don't think Baba could make it any clearer to me that he's in charge of all my accounts. And he did it in such a beautiful way, using little children who I love also. And that's how I've gotten to be a resident of Meherabad for going on 31 years now. So that's the end of that story.
Mr. Nagendra Prasad, do you have a question?
Jai Baba, sir. Yes, sir. A small question.
Go ahead.
Jai Baba, sir. Sir, have you met Meher
Jai
Baba, sir, in
Baba.
person? Have you met Meher Baba in person?
I have not. No, I
Oh.
just had that experience of having his darshan when
Yes,
he
sir.
was still in the body.
Sir, sir.
But I remember this in Mumsley Hall
Sir.
to that point where Baba, just in a moment,
Yes.
he could come all the way halfway around the world
Yes, sir.
and give me his darshan. Eretz had kind of a knowing look in his eyes
Sir.
as he was listening to the story.
Sir, sir. Thank you, sir. Jai Baba. Now you're speaking from
Jai Baba.
Meherabad or USA, sir?
I am speaking from staff quarters which is right the NPR Meherabad.
Okay, sir. Oh, now you're listening to know. Thank you, sir. Jai Baba. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Anything else you want to tell us, Beef?
Nothing's coming to mind.
Tell us something about your photography and pictures that you've been doing for the books.
Well, I told you that when Baoji was asking Burton to basically write the book that Baba had asked Bao to write, which is called Meher Baba's New Life. And one of the interests that Baba gave me once I became a resident was to go to the places where Meher Baba's spent a lot of time and try to document it as much as I can with photographs, with video of interviews of people, of maps and things like that. So when Jeff was working on the book, he said, oh, well, you've gone to these places, which include places where Meher Baba was during the new life. So, and then later he actually financially helped me to go to this. Like I hired a car and I started at the Marnanash cave, and Baba had traveled all through Andhra, Karnataka, Maharashtra, back to Meherabad. So I tried to follow the route and take photographs of the places. And so in that book, there's about 100 photographs. And it was on gate in the summertime where the gulmores are in flower and the bougainvillea is in flower. And that was used as cover for the Globe magazine for one issue. So there's many different photographs that I've taken, and some have been used in publications.
Anybody else? Anything?
May I ask a question, please? I
Please
had raised my hand long time back.
go ahead.
So, as I understand, Bif mentioned that he has been staying now for 31 years. And he also said he's at the staff quarters. So, I mean, I would like to understand how, what does he do and how does he manage to sustain himself in Meherabad? I mean, what does he do for his bread and butter?
You want to take that answer? Question, Beef? Beef? Can you unmute? Beef? Unmute yourself, please. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Okay.
Okay, you can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, so I thought I answered the question when Baba showed me that he's in charge of all my finances and all my spiritual accounts, all my sanskaric accounts, etc., etc. So he does it in his own way. He could be very creative and all that. In terms of what I'm doing now, I work once a week in Mara's garden at Meherabad. I do the night duty at the Smarty, where I spend the night at the Smarty supervising the security, the paid security that are up there. And we're working on a translation of the book that Baba asked Bao to write called Mehir Darshan. And Baba had told Bao that he could write it in Hindi. So it was published in 1972. And it's the most beautiful book because Baba said, I want my life story told in 10,000 couplets. And not only one form of poetry, but Baba wanted 4 different types of couplets to be used in Meher Darshan. And it's never been properly translated into English. So we're very slowly attempting to do a good translation of this book, Meher Darshan. And then there's, so many other things. Sometimes I take people to the Laura Caves, or like Sam said, I took a group to the Happy Valley. And many things happen that you just have to be willing to participate and help if that's what Baba wants you to do.
Does anyone else have any questions? It's time 1 minute past 7 o'clock. Bif, is there anything you want to mention before you sign off?
I can't think of anything in particular.
Okay. So, folks, you think we should let him go so easily? Okay. All right. We now conclude our meeting with a prayer, and then the Aartis. The prayer will be by Janice and Archana Grover. If you could please do the Aartis. And then during that 1 minute silence, we shall try and remember Mr. Eraj Karadia, who went to Baba this afternoon. So let's start with the prayer, Janice.
Yes, Uncle.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. अवतार मेहर बाबा कीजिए। हे परवरदिगार, सबके राखनहार और सबकी रक्षा करने वाले, तुम्हारा कोई आदि नहीं है और ना तुम्हारा कोई अंत है। तुम अद्वैत हो, तुम तुलना से परे हो और तुम्हारा पार कोई नहीं पा सकता है। तुम्हारा कोई रंग और कोई रूप नहीं है। तुम आविर्भाव से रहित हो और तुम गुणातीत हो। तुम अपार हो और अगाध हो, कल्पना और धारणा से परे हो, शाश्वत और अनश्वर हो। तुम अखंडनीय हो और दिव्य नेत्रों के सिवाय और किसी भी प्रकार से तुम्हें कोई नहीं देख सकता है। तुम्हारा अस्तित्व सदैव था, तुम सदैव रहते हो और तुम सदैव रहोगे। तुम सर्वत्र हो, तुम हर वस्तु में हो और तुम हर जगह से परे तथा हर वस्तु से परे भी हो। तुम आकाश में हो और पाताल में हो, तुम व्यक्त हो और अव्यक्त हो। तुम सब लोकों पर हो और समस्त लोकों से परे हो। तुम तीनों भुवनों में हो और तीनों भुवनों से परे भी हो। तुम अगोचर हो और स्वतंत्र हो। तुम सृष्टि के रचने वाले हो, स्वामियों के स्वामी हो, समस्त मनों और हृदयों के ज्ञाता हो। तुम सर्वशक्तिमान हो और सर्वव्यापी हो। तुम अनंत ज्ञान हो, अनंत शक्ति हो और अनंत आनंद हो। तुम ज्ञान के महासागर हो, सर्वज्ञ हो, अनंत ज्ञान रखने वाले हो। तुम भूत, वर्तमान और भविष्य के ज्ञाता हो और तुम स्वयं ज्ञान हो। तुम पूर्ण दयामय हो और सदैव परहितकारी हो। तुम आत्माओं की आत्मा हो और अनंत गुणों से संपन्न एक परमात्मा हो। तुम सत्य, ज्ञान और परमानंद की त्रिमूर्ति हो। तुम सत्य के मूल हो, प्रेम के महासागर हो। तुम सनातन सत्ता हो, ऊंचों में सबसे ऊंचे हो। तुम प्रभु और परमेश्वर हो। तुम परब्रह्म हो और परात्पर परब्रह्म भी हो। तुम परब्रह्म परमात्मा हो, अल्लाह हो, इलाही हो, यजदान हो, अग्रमस्त हो और प्रियतम ईश्वर हो। तुम्हारा नाम ईजत अर्थात एकमात्र पूज्य है। हे असीम दया के निधि प्रभुराज, हम अपने सब पापों के लिए पश्चाताप करते हैं। हर एक विचार के लिए जो असत्य, अनुचित या गंदा था, हर एक बोले हुए शब्द के लिए जिसे बोलना हमें उचित न था, और हर एक कर्म के लिए जिसे करना हमें उचित न था। स्वार्थ से प्रेरित हर एक शब्द, स्वार्थ से प्रेरित हर एक कर्म, शब्द तथा विचार के लिए, तथा द्वेष प्रेरित हर एक कर्म, शब्द और विचार के लिए हम पश्चाताप करते हैं। विशेषकर हर एक कामुक विचार तथा क्रिया के लिए, ऐसे हर एक वचन के लिए जिसको हमने पूरा नहीं किया, सब सत्य वचनों के लिए और सभी निंदा, पाखंड, दम या लोगों के पीछे उनके दोष बताने के लिए हम अनुताप करते हैं। और खासकर दूसरों का नाश करने वाले हर एक कर्म के लिए, दूसरों को दुख देने वाले हर एक शब्द तथा कर्म के लिए, तथा दूसरों पर दुख गिरने की इच्छा करने के लिए हम अनुताप करते हैं। हे प्रभुराज, आप हम पर असीम दया करके हमारे किए हुए पापों को क्षमा कीजिए और वैसे ही आपकी मर्जी के अनुसार विचार करने में, बोलने में तथा कार्य करने में जो हमारी असमर्थता सदा रहती आई है, उसको भी क्षमा कीजिए। यही हमारी आपसे प्रार्थना है। प्रियतम परमात्मा, हमारी ऐसी सहायता कर कि हम तुझसे अधिक का अधिक प्रेम करें, और अधिक और अधिक, और फिर भी उससे भी अधिक प्रेम करें, जब तक कि हम तुझ में मिलकर एक हो जाने के पात्र बन जाएं। और तू हम सबकी ऐसी सहायता कर कि हम अंत अंत तक प्रियतम बाबा का दामन दृढ़ता से पकड़े रहे। अवतार मेहर बाबा की जय।
Your Baba ki jai.
Archana, can you do
Jai
the?
Baba. Can I do the Australian Aarti, Sam?
Haji,
Can I do the Australian Aarti?
please do.
Would that be fine? Okay. Oh, glorious, eternal, ancient one, your face is a bright, transcendental sun. Light in this dark world and the tears I weep. My heart, Meher, I give to you to keep. Creator, yet creationless you are. Truth and truth's body, divine avatar. Who through compassion the three worlds maintains. Destroy this ignorance that life sustains. These five lights are the whirling spokes of breath of the world's wheel that bears me on to death. Unless you who are infinitely kind break the wheel's hub which is conditioned mind. This incense is my love, these fruits my art. which to please you I have shaped from my heart. Accept them as you would a simple flower that has no use beyond its shining art. You are myself, I sing to you in praise and beg your love to bear me through the day. Till you, the ever-living perfect one, fill you my darkness with your shining sun. Avtar Meher Baba ki
Meher Baba ki jai.
Avtar Meher
Meher
Baba
Baba
ki
ki
jai.
jai.
Beloved Avtar Meher Baba.
Meher Baba ki jai.
Folks, we shall now hold a minute's silence. May Baba keep his nazar on Iraj Karadia's soul. Thank you, everybody. Before we part, I just want to say that in 2 days' time, we shall be going into the celebration of Baba's birthday. For those of us who are coming to the center in the morning and the evening programs, please don't forget to bring your umbrellas. The reason being, there's going to be a heavy downpour of his love. See if you can contain it. Otherwise, bring an umbrella. Thank you, everybody. And Tar Meher Baba ki Jai.
Baba ki jai.
Jai Baba.
I'll end the program for all, Uncle.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Baba, for everything. Avtar Meher Baba ki jai. Avtar Meher Baba ki jai. Avtar Meher
Thank you,
Baba.
Baba, for everything.
Thank you, Baba. Jai Baba.